All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like we have a good amount of people in here. My name is David Miller. I'm the managing partner of Rosen Dental Transitions. We're here tonight, and I have Blake Cohen from our consulting team, who's going to do the bulk of the presentation. I'm probably going to act more as the host, if that makes sense. Just because Blake carries so much expertise in this area, we want to give him a chance to share as much time as possible. Knowing that it's late, we appreciate you guys joining. We tried to do it in the evening, just given that you all probably have work and families, and if you're like my house, the kids are asleep now, so it gives you a little bit of time to sneak away and do this stuff. And if you have a cocktail with you, we won't judge anyone, so that's okay as well. So one thing we're going to focus on today is how to buy the dental practice at the right price. A quick background on our family of companies and how we all work together. So Rosen and Associates is the accounting firm that a lot of people are familiar with. Has been around for 30 years and has 800 dental clients across the Northeast. Rosen Summit Dental Advisors, which is where Blake is a consultant at, joined the Rosen family of companies about 2 years ago. Previously, Blake and Nancy and the team over at Summit Dental Consultants or Summit Dental Advisors worked across New England with dental practices again for the period of about 20 or 30 years. And so it really made a lot of sense, and it was exciting to see those two companies join together. And then the third side is the transition arm, which is what I manage. We help people buy and sell dental practices, and we routinely partner with Blake and Nancy and the team at Rosen Summit because there's so much overlap when we're helping people buy or transition practices through partnerships and things of that nature. A couple quick housekeeping items as we get started. One, if you have questions, you can place them in the chat, and we'll try and answer them as best we can. Another option is you can raise your hand, and we'll try and call on you. We've muted everyone just to try and eliminate the background noise. If you're having any problems with your audio, I saw someone mention that in the chat, click the three dots in the upper right-hand corner and go to device settings, and you want to make sure that the speaker is set to whatever you're using, headphones, Bluetooth, etc. So now that the housekeeping is out of the way, we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, as we mentioned, please ask questions as we go through, because that'll help us make sure that we provide the information you're looking for, because we're going to cover a lot today. So, Blake, I said, I'm going to let you take over, but why don't you give a little background on kind of your history in the dental industry real quick, just so people get an idea of kind of where you're coming from, and then we will jump into the content. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave. Yes, as Dave said, my name is Blake Cohen. I am the senior consultant at Rosen Summit Dental Advisors. I have been doing this either through Summit Dental Partners or now Rosen Summit Dental Advisors for the last almost 10 plus years now. Prior to that, I was managing a practice in downtown Boston for a few years, and before that, I was in college. I kind of started at the bottom, checking in patients, looking up their insurance verification, everything that you have your front desk do. I did it for, however many years I was there, and then I was able to take what I learned and team up with what was then Summit Dental Partners, and doing a lot of training at the front, verbiage, software training, putting in recall protocols, implementing accounts receivable protocols, kind of the A through Z of the administrative side of dentistry. And then I would say 5-6 years ago, I really started working on the transition side of things, not brokering practices like Dave does, but working on the buyer representation side, which, I felt, and definitely Dave and I are on the same page, feel that was missing, in the industry. You have, brokers, attorneys, accountants, really helping set up the seller to get their practice ready for sale on the market. And a lot of times the buyer would go in there kind of taking it at face value or not have as many resources to their at their disposal like a seller has. So what I've been doing now for, like I said, 5 or 6 years is I'm able to go in there and do an operational due diligence of a practice, looking at all the software, looking at the practice itself. And, I've started to explain it as I'm essentially giving you the Carfax of the practice. If you're buying $1 million practice, I'm not necessarily telling you it's worth $1 million, $1.2 million, 800,000, but I'm telling you what you are getting for that $1 million. And, I've got great feedback on it. Doctors are very happy to have the feeling that there is someone in their corner looking at things. And as I tell every doctor I work with, it's not that the brokers are manipulating anything or saying things that aren't true, but it's like I said, it's nice to just know that there is someone on my side looking out for my best interest as well, and I don't just have to take what the seller or the seller's team is saying at face value. And so that's kind of what brought us to this today, is to be able to give everybody a crash course, if you will, on some of the most important things to know when you decide, okay, I think it's time for me to own my own practice. And so there, as the slide says, there's a few things that we should understand before we really even dive into making that offer, or even getting myself in there for a due diligence, or Dave in there for the cash flow analysis as well.
Hey Blake, one thing I want to add, just because you brought it up. So from a broker's perspective, Blake highlighted something, right? We're there to help you and give you all the information to make a decision, but ultimately we represent the seller, right? So you want to try and have someone that can help navigate things. And I'll say it's a very competitive market, and I'm sure if some of you have tried to buy practices, you've experienced that, especially inside the 495 loop. One of the biggest challenges that brokers have working with young buyers is obviously the lack of experience, and it's not your fault. But the less experience or expertise you have advising you, the slower you move through the process, and that could mean that you could miss out on an opportunity, because offers happen quickly. And if you don't understand how to feel comfortable with a practice within a 1 week or 7-day span, which seems almost impossible, but there is a way to do that, then it could put you at a disadvantage against some of the other buyers because they may have more experience or may be more comfortable. So again, Blake will go through some of this stuff, but I just thought it was important so that you understand the dynamic that as a broker, we're representing the seller. So we can't, we want you to feel comfortable in giving the information, but we're not representing you, and we can't perform due diligence for you like someone like Blake can. So
thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Blake. Sorry.
Perfect. No. Thank you. That's
So walk through some of the must-haves that like the buyers must start with. Like there's other stuff to the process, but let's talk. We really want to focus, because we have a short amount of time, on some of the big ticket items that
definitely
people need to understand.
And like Dave was saying, it's very competitive out there. There are times now where sometimes practices don't even make it to market. But for the ones that do, I would say, number one, financing. Get pre-approved. Make sure that you are a good candidate for lending, and that you are ready to go if and when an offer is accepted. There are credit unions out there, smaller banks that are able to do this. However, in my personal opinion, I would recommend using a bank with a healthcare division. The credit unions are great. You want to have a savings account, get a car loan, small business loan. But when we're talking dentistry and healthcare, I think it's really important to have someone that really knows the nuances of the dental field, healthcare in general, I should say, because some things are a little different than if you were opening up a pizza shop. So I think it's really important, whether it's there's TD, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Provide, just to name a few, and we know a lot of the bankers in that world, and really whichever bank you do go with, they know what they're doing. They've done this before, and I think it's really smart to make sure, like I said, that you have the financing put in place, you're pre-approved, because now you're hopefully one step ahead of the doctor next to you that's going into it now without that part of the puzzle put together. So that's really important. The next thing too is finding an attorney, and I'll put attorney and accountant together. Your neighbor or your family friend that has been doing your taxes, or helping you out with maybe little legal questions here or there, they're great for those little things. Again, it's really important that you have a dental specific attorney and accountant, because they will be able to help you along the way with certain aspects that maybe your personal injury attorney might not know all the ins and outs of getting your legal entity put together, or putting together a purchase and sale agreement or a letter of intent with the seller. And the same thing goes for the accountant. What makes the most sense for you in terms of what type of corporation should we be, an LLC, an S corp. I'm not the person to go for that, as I'm not an accountant, but lucky for me, I have Rosen and Associates behind me as well that are able to answer those types of questions, which is really, really important. And then, like we were talked about earlier, the due diligence. Obviously, I'd love for you guys to have me come in, but even if you're not using myself, I cannot urge you enough to get somebody in dentistry that understands the business of the dental world, to go in there, to do the operational due diligence of the practice, to make sure that everything is as it appears. A lot of the times I will be working with a doctor, and whether it be the seller or the seller's representation will say, Blake, tell me what you need. I'll be able to get you those reports, and we can have you review them with your doctor, at your convenience. Sounds all well and good, but I actually want to be getting in there, and whoever you use should want to get in there. Not that I think they're going to send me falsified reports or anything like that, but I like to run the reports a certain way. Not everybody understands the dental software, and there's many of them. Going back to the attorney or the accountant, they're gonna understand the business of dentistry, but they're not really in the weeds, if you will, a lot of the times. So they may not fully understand, well, I know what an accounts receivable report is, of course, but I don't know how to get that report with the correct parameters in Dentrix, in Open Dental, in PracticeWorks, so on and so forth. As I said, there are many different types of dental softwares. So that's why I really think it's important for someone like me, or anyone for that matter that's doing this, go in there and run the reports the way they know how to do them. Because you could check off the wrong box or not put in the correct parameter, and the information I give you now could be useless, for lack of a better term, and not represent what is really going on in the practice. And that moves us on to insurance credentialing, which is, I can't stress enough how important insurance credentialing is. If you're lucky enough to buy or be buying a fee-for-service practice, you don't have to pay attention to this part. But for everybody else, take some notes here. So credentialing with insurance, I would start that process as soon as possible. It doesn't cost any money if you're going to be doing it yourself. All it is really it takes some time. But once you have your tax ID set up and your type 2 NPI, I would start credentialing, like I said, right away. Because if you are doing a full credential with Blue Cross, Delta, Cigna, MetLife, it can take upwards of 90 days. If you're already credentialed with those insurances at a different location, that doesn't transfer to the practice that you are trying to buy. you would have to do what's called an add location credentialing packet. It's smaller than a full credential, and it doesn't usually take as long, but it still can take 30, 45 days in some cases, and it's still just as important because I think one of the poll questions went out there. It says, can you bill under the seller while you're getting credentialed? Well, yes, you can. You can do anything you want, but should you? And the answer to that is no, because billing, if I'm doing the work and I'm billing under Dave, that is technically insurance fraud. You are not allowed to bill under someone else's credentials. So I have run into cases where, I close on the practice today, and this has actually happened. No one, let me back up. They didn't hire us till after the fact, luckily, but no one prior to that, their attorney, the broker in that case, told them that they needed to credential. They didn't know that, so they bought this practice and opened the doors, and they weren't credentialed with any of the insurances. Now, some of them, if you're not going to credential with and you're going to be out of network, not a huge deal. You can still process the claim. The insurance check will still come to the practice. Other ones, one of the big ones, Delta of Massachusetts, even if you're not going to be in network with them, you still have to credential as out of network. So if you don't do either one for Delta of Massachusetts, a claim is just going to sit there in limbo and never even process. So, I could talk about this, more and more and more. And if anyone has any questions, you can please ask them or get in touch with me afterwards. But the insurance credentialing, like I said, started as soon as possible. It is that important because you don't want to end up doing free dentistry, and you certainly don't want to take the chance of billing under a different provider's credentials because that could come back and really, really bite you.
Yeah, Blake, that's great. So let's try and go a little bit topic by topic so we can answer some questions, but also get into more specifics. I think when you talk about the lender, a question popped up that, when you get pre-approved through a lender, does that expire over a period of time? It doesn't necessarily expire, but what would impact whether it's still valid is if your financial situation changes. So if you, by chance happen to buy a house and you go from having $200,000 or $300,000 in the bank to having 75, that impacts the amount you could borrow and buy. If you're, obviously your monthly debt service changes. If you buy cars, buy a house, buy a boat. So any major material changes from a financial standpoint could impact that pre-qualification. In theory, I would say it's good to check in every 6 months, but if nothing's changed, it should be valid. There shouldn't be anything that would impact it. I will say one of the and Blake, you can talk about this, but from a broker's perspective, there's a couple things that I ask buyers to remember. One is every lender has a different credit appetite. So even though they're all dental specific, one bank may be willing to lend 100% of last year's collections. Another bank may be able to lend 85. One bank may not like to give loans for practices with declining revenues. Another one may not care. So you need to potentially apply at multiple lenders to buy the practice and talk with your advisors because they may have an idea of what fits for the specific situation. The other thing is that a good lender should know the attorneys and people in the space and help you coordinate the transaction. So being able to call your attorneys to make sure things are on track, get the conditions of lendings related to the asset purchase agreement, request information from the brokers. They should help do a lot of that for you and not just leave you to, handle every little thing that's required as part of the deal. So, sorry, Blake, I wanted to share that because we have one question please, and go through that. So
I appreciate it. You were able to speak to that much better than myself for sure. Yeah, and I mean, I think this is also kind of right up your alley. The right lender helps hold everything together, as Dave was saying, and the wrong lender can tear everything apart. I think more so that's, again, back to kind of the communication of things. Especially now, you want things moving as quickly as possible, with information that is needed from buyer to seller, seller to buyer, going as smoothly and as transparently as possible. So, of course, there have been deals I have worked on, and I'm sure Dave has as well, where whether it be a lender or an attorney on one side, that can kind of slow things down, and you miss deadlines, and next thing you know, that practice that you loved so much just slipped through your fingers.
Yeah. And I think, the first step when you see a practice you like is submitting an offer and getting a letter of intent signed. And, once that letter of intent is signed, the good transactions that close and people close successfully and people are happy, both sides of the transaction gain confidence as the deal progresses. And, part of the way that people gain confidence is by hitting deadlines and having, the right lender and people involved, because, all right, we have the offer letter signed. We have to complete due diligence. We have to get financing approved, and we have to get the contracts negotiated. So if you have a bad lender that, disrupts the deal, that's going to impact, obviously, the confidence of all the parties involved. The seller may be asking, is this person credit worthy? The buyer may start asking, is this really a good deal? If the bank won't approve me, should I buy this? And it could just be the bank's inexperience that's causing a lot of that doubt. And so anytime, you can continue to build confidence through the transaction, that's going to help push things in the right direction. So.
Yep. And I think this also goes back to making sure not just the lenders, but everyone is dental specific. I have worked in a few, transitions where, they're using their friend from college that is an attorney, but they are, a real estate attorney. And maybe the deadlines aren't as close as they are in dentistry, and things can just, I'll get to it. Yeah, I got a few things on my plate. I'm helping you out. No worries. We're almost there. And again, you just don't want anything to slow that process up. Perfect example right here. Thank you, Dave. Attorneys are not one of the places you want to save money. Again, I'm sure if you have any friends or family that do this, they are good at their area of law. Kind of maybe just like, you don't want your periodontist to do the root canal. You don't want your orthodontist to be placing an implant. Same thing here. You want to make sure that you are working with attorneys that work specifically in this space. And there are plenty of them out there. Dave and I know a lot of them. Your lenders that you work with are going to have good relationships with these attorneys, accountants. So, as long as you ask the question, you will get directed into the right hands. And more often than not, I can at least speak for myself and Dave. You won't have to ask that question with us, because we will proactively be getting you introduced to the right people that will be able to guide you along and set you up for success during this process, because we know that it can be a bit overwhelming, and that's why we are here to, like I said, help you and get you into the hands of people that know what they're doing in areas that we're not the experts in.
Yeah, and I'll say, listen, attorneys are smart people. Smart people don't like to admit they're wrong, right? So a very few attorneys are going to tell you that they don't know how to do a dental transaction. So that's why you need to be careful about who you start the process with. And the worst thing is that they'll get in and they'll negotiate for you on things that don't matter and miss the things that do. And we've had that happen where a dental specific attorney that's working with the seller, the buyer is working with someone who hasn't done a transaction before, and they're conceding, the seller's conceding on negotiations because they don't matter, and the topics that do, the seller is going to win on those. So by having someone to represent you, it's going to make sure that the important matters are fair for both sides. So Blake, you talked about the accountants and kind of like the wealth management side. We talked about them being dental specific.
Yes.
I think a clear sign is, are they able to give you meaningful advice through the process, or are they just, asking to see P&Ls, and they're not really guiding the conversation for you. What have you seen, Blake, with on the accounting side?
Yeah, I mean, again, dental specific accounts, they're going to know what's going on. I have, I've worked with some in the past that I'm sorry, a poll question just popped up. Moving that out of the way. I've worked with worked in some transitions where it's a non-dental specific accountant that, again, like Dave said, they're smart people. They know what they're doing, just maybe not necessarily in this space. I mean, for example, I'm working with a few doctors right now in transitions. And one of the things I make sure I bring up now because of issues that have happened in the past are the accounts receivables. Are you going to buy them? Are you not going to buy them? And if you don't buy them, what does that look like in terms of collecting the money on behalf of the seller? These are things that, to Dave's point, an accountant or an attorney, whoever is kind of help advising in some of these, they might, fight for something that at the end of the day really doesn't matter that much, and then completely miss over the parts that do. For example, if the seller is going to keep their accounts receivable, and a patient comes in to get new work done but has an old balance, who gets paid first? Does that money that they're paying today for this work today, is that going to go to the seller's old balance first, or is that going to go to the doctor performing the services right now? If there isn't something that spells that out clearly, I have seen some lively disagreements over who gets that money. And I could argue for both sides of why it's important. But luckily, like Dave was saying, I will gladly tell you things I don't know and put you in the direction of someone who does know that. I have my opinions on that, but I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to write that up for you. I will, and Dave will, and your accountants will advise you on what we think is important for you, and let the attorneys, negotiate that in your purchase sale agreements, or the purchase sale agreements. And then here for the accountants, the wealth management, we want to be looking at what are they paying now? Are there areas that we can save some money? There are going to be the benefits. That's always a big thing. I always encourage my doctors to look at what is the seller giving to their staff, not just to their hourly pay, but anything else, because we have to remember the seller doesn't have $1 million loan that they're paying back either, so they're able to afford to give more. So we want to make sure we understand the finances of this and go into it with an open mind and be transparent with the staff. We're not running in there day one saying nothing's going to change, because we want everyone to be happy and like us. Because it's a lot harder to say nothing's going to change and then have to take things away because, whoops, I can't afford to give 5 weeks vacation. I can't afford to pay everybody's health insurance in full. I can't afford to start a 401k with a 4% match right away. We have to be realistic with the staff. Let them know our intents. This is our intention to do this, but we need to assess the situation with my team to see what we can and can't do, and hopefully implement that as soon as possible.
And as a buyer, I think it's important to understand the large expenses of a dental practice. The staff costs, the rent, the dental supplies, and the lab are going to be the biggest chunks of the expenses. And for the most part, they're pretty fixed, right? You can't change those when you take over the practice within reason. You could switch labs. So you want to understand, when you look at profit and loss statements and you're evaluating a practice, what's a discretionary expense that, when you buy the practice, you can control, versus what is a non-discretionary. So that will help you understand the cash flow. For example, a doctor may have $20,000 in continuing education and meetings throughout the year. Well, you may not go to Honolulu to do your CE and bring your whole staff for a trip. Those type of things you need to understand, because that's profit, and they're just, they're funneling it to a different expense. So really important to understand the difference in that, because that's going to give you a clearer picture of what the cash flow is. Because I think, part of the challenge is that as a buyer you encounter is you're going to find a practice online or talk to a broker. They're going to send you a package of information with maybe photos, financials, production reports, and then maybe you're going to visit the office once and hopefully meet the seller. And after that, you're expected to decide whether you want to buy it or not. And so, how can you do that in such a short period of time? I think these are some of the areas you should focus on. Production by procedure. Blake, the biggest thing is they have to be able to replace the seller, right? I mean, you can't.
Yes, you do. So one of the things when I'm doing the operational due diligence, I'm sitting there with the buyer, the doctor, and we're going to be looking at what is the doctor or any other associates doing, and what's the hygiene team doing? Because you need to be able to make sure that you can at least do the same as what the doctor's doing. So, personally, I like to see a seller that maybe is doing bread and butter dentistry, crown and bridge filling. Like I refer out my root canals. I don't do Invisalign. I have a hygiene team that has done 3 quadrants of scaling and root planing over the last 2 years and maybe 1 perio maintenance. I look at that and I see opportunity. Hey, are you comfortable doing your own endo? Is that something you like to do? Do you place your own implants? Are you trained in Invisalign? Yes, and yes. Well, we do this the right way. There's another $200,000 of production over the next 2 years, 3 years. The hygiene team, it's performing well, but they don't have any perio in there. You cultivate a perio program in the hygiene department, there's another X amount of production. Now, I couch all of that with, of course, if it is needed. I look at things from a business standpoint. You guys are the doctors, so I leave the clinical aspect up to you. Obviously, we're not advocating doing anything just for the bottom line number, but assuming everything falls in line with clinical guidelines and your dental philosophy, because one doctor looks at a patient and says one thing, another doc sees another thing. So it has to be within your comfort zone, of course. But we really want to look. I'm looking at that production by provider for sure. I think that's a very important report to look at. Unfortunately, a few years ago, I was working with a doctor, and I explained to him. I said, this seller seems to be very proactive. I'm seeing he does a lot of crowns each month. He's averaging about 35 crowns a month. I see he's doing a lot of Invisalign as well. And he's placing his own implants. We sat down, we had this conversation, the buyer and I, because he was more of a conservative doctor. I had to be upfront and honest with him. I said, based off of what you're telling me, this doesn't seem like it might be the right fit for you, because if you can't produce where the seller is, you're going to have a hard time meeting those production numbers in order to, just cover your costs. Unfortunately, the doctor made the decision that they wanted to, go forward with that practice. And lo and behold, there are certain difficulties that arose in that practice financially because, one, the doctor never ended up getting trained on Invisalign, so the whole ortho department that was in that practice, non-existent anymore, does not place their own implants, as far as I know to this day. So that was another area that there was some lost production, and was not able to keep up the same numbers of the major restorative procedures that the seller was. Again, Dave and myself, we're going to be able to go in there and do a cash flow analysis and look at these procedures and explain to you what that means in terms of you as an owner. But it's really important for you as the doctor to understand what type of doctor you are and what you're comfortable doing and not doing. If like, I'm a conservative doctor, I don't like to touch a tooth that I don't think needs to be touched, and we're looking at a practice that the evidence shows otherwise for the seller, that probably is not the best fit for you. Just because your friends and colleagues are buying practices and you're seeing them flying off the market, that doesn't mean that you have to buy one just for the sake of buying one, because in the long term, that probably won't serve you that well. You want to make sure you buy for fit. On the consulting side, I tell my doctors, hire for fit. I can train a front desk person on how to calculate a copay, but I can't change their personality. I can't change the way that they are. Same thing goes for the doctors on the buyer side. Buy a practice that fits you. Don't change yourself to try to fit a practice, because more often than not, that is not going to work out in the long run for you.
Just to highlight the points, as we're talking, you can quickly see that, like, unless you've gone through practice management softwares and pulled management reports, you really need someone to help you navigate this. And there's a lot of different aspects and things that can come up. I mean, we've talked about production by procedure. We haven't even got into postings and money and the ARs and how to detect if there's embezzlement or fraud or, think funny business going on with the office staff. So I think this, I just wanted to put this slide in to encourage you to make sure that you have someone that can, the obvious stuff of can I do what the doctor's doing, but digging deeper and saying, okay, how much of it is this procedure? Or, when we're posting this money, how's the money flowing? Is it all going to the right accounts and being collected? So, Blake, I want to jump to the insurance, and
Sure.
we had a question. You talked about the timing earlier. So for credentialing, this is a very specific question, but I figure we answer it and then we
Sure.
can get into a couple things, because we just have this and one more slide and then we'll wrap up for the evening. So for credentialing, if you established a business entity and got your type 2 NPI before closing, can you start the credentialing process? So I think it's like basically the seller is still open seeing patients. Can you get fully credentialed before closing and have two businesses credentialed at the same address?
Almost.
Okay.
So I will use Delta of Mass as an example because they are the biggest player here. Delta of Massachusetts, typically more so than ever now, requires a bill of sale when you are doing the credentialing. They want to see when the practice was sold to avoid any type of overlap of owner-seller credentialing there. But if you haven't closed yet, what you can do is you can put the expected close date on there and say, here's all my paperwork filled out. The expected close date is April 1st. And then once you have the purchase and sale agreement, you can then scan and email that or fax that over to them. And then it should only be a few business days for them to process, because they have everything else at that point. What we have noticed is if you go and fully credential with an insurance company, it will usually shut off the seller. And so if the seller then, bills something out, it could come back as denied, not get processed, or get billed as an out-of-network provider at that point. And if your seller is going to stay on too, you need to realize that they will need to credential under your new business entity as well, not just you as the buyer. Credentialing, it's tough. I mean, they make it so it really is a pain in the neck to do and time it up perfectly. That's why I just recommend starting it as early as possible. If you don't have the actual closing date, put when the expected closing date is, and then fax or scan and email the last page of the bill of sale once it's done. But I mean, for a yes or no answer, you really can't have two entities going at the same time out of one location. It's a good way. It's a good way to get red flagged and potentially get audited.
Who who do you, I know there's a million insurance companies. I think the tendencies, if I'm buying a smaller practice, I may want to credential with everyone to get patients, but who do you see as the best ones as far as reimbursement rates, just for like an inside tip for people, if they're buying a new business and they're thinking about credentialing with more people than the seller was,
Sure.
who would you recommend to maybe limit that to? I know not all fit, but
Sure.
just
So,
generally speaking.
I'll use an actual example. I'm working with a doctor now. The seller, and again, this is Delta. The seller is contracted with Delta Dental, PPO, and Premier. So there are a lot of plans out there as well. There, and one of the most common plans for patients on the Delta side is PPO plus Premier, which means me, the patient, I can be seen by a PPO doctor, or I can go to a Premier doctor. The difference between the two is, for the doctor anyway, PPO has a lower reimbursement than Premier. For example, a cleaning at PPO levels, it gets reimbursed, $77 give or take. A Premier one's, $93 give or take. Same procedure, same everything. Just because you're PPO, you're going to get reimbursed less. So, as I was saying, one of the most common types of plans patients get from Delta is that PPO plus Premier. So if you're a doctor that is credentialed with both PPO and Premier, all those patients will automatically revert to PPO, and you will be reimbursed at a lower rate for every single procedure you or your hygienist do. However, if you decide to credential as a Premier only doctor, all those patients that are PPO plus Premier will automatically get kicked up to a Premier level reimbursement, and you're not changing anything you're doing clinically or administratively, but you will see an automatic 20-ish% bump for that same exact procedure just because you don't take that PPO. So similar thing with Blue Cross, with Dental Blue PPO and the indemnity. Really the only difference is they don't have their version of PPO plus Premier. They have PPO patients, and they have the indemnity, which is their Premier type of patients. What I'm seeing, depending on your the geography and the demographic, a lot of doctors are leaning more towards Delta Premier and Blue Cross indemnity only. But if you're a doctor that says, you know what, I want to get more patients, if you negotiate or have a company negotiate on behalf of you, I've had Guardian have some good reimbursement. I've had Guardian have some terrible reimbursement. Cigna, they just slashed all their reimbursements by 15 to 20%, so they're not really one I would recommend. MetLife, out of network is great. In network, you're seeing huge write-offs. Aetna, okay. Really though, if you can afford to do it, I like Delta and Blue Cross as the big two with the best reimbursements. And most practices I work with, on average, they're between 35 and 45% Delta anyway. They're that big of a player in most dental practices. So it's a popular insurance for employers. Their reimbursement is one of the better reimbursements. It's not the best always, but it's certainly better than most. So again, like I said, if you can afford to do it, I like Blue Cross Indemnity and Delta Dental Premier only, and that'll help reduce your insurance write-offs, your contractual insurance write-offs. Sorry.
All right. Well, all right. So we're about to the end of time. I'm going to try and sum up a few things just based on what we've talked about, just to try and leave some information. If you have questions, obviously, we'll reach out to everyone via email just so you can reply and set up time to either talk with Blake or myself. A couple things from my perspective as the broker, what I'm telling sellers and what we're advising them is, first, we got to look at their CV and work experience. And when you meet them face to face, does their personality fit your culture? Right. So, when you meet buyers and sellers, I understand you may be potentially nervous. Try and be yourself, because ultimately you need to make sure that you're going to fit with the staff and the patients the way the seller has. Is the buyer pre-qualified by a reputable lender? We talked about that. Buyers can have student loans and still borrow money, so we know that, and the sellers are educated in that regard. But if a buyer comes to me and says, "Yeah, I'm working with, First Republic Bank," I'm going to put them at the back of the line unless they'll talk to another lender. The third is motivation. So from a seller, I want to know, has the buyer talked to advisors or hired any? How long have they been looking? Have they made offers on any other practices? How motivated are they to move? Because that's obviously, there's a lot of buyers out there, and you want to talk to the ones that are serious. Out of the stuff Blake talked about today, if we go all the way back to the beginning, just to give a quick summary, get my scroll over here. First is, before you even go see practices, you have to get your financing in place, and you have to talk to a bank that's reputable that can pre-qualify you and tell you what to expect of the process. Once you find a practice and you're getting ready to submit an offer, you have to find an attorney, because that attorney and an accountant are going to help you review the numbers and submit an offer that's going to position you well to secure the practice. Once that offer is accepted and you have most of your team together, you have your accountant, attorney, and lender, then you need the due diligence piece, which is Blake's side. Blake starts from the beginning to be with you, but he's really getting into the practice after that offer is accepted to get into the operations and everything from that standpoint. Once that due diligence is done and you're moving forward, that's where Blake and the team will help and say, okay, we need to get your insurance credentialing set up so that when you write the check to the seller and meet the staff and you're going to see patients on Monday, you can accept their insurance as is and be in network and have as little disruptions to the flow of the practice as possible. There's always bumps in the road. There's stuff that is a pain, and there will always be things that go wrong. It's too complex of a process to not have that happen. But you want to lower your chances of that happening, and that's what having the right team can do. So, thank you guys for hanging out in this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Blake, any parting words in 60 seconds or less, so we can let people get to the Celebrity Big Brother finale?
You can't be over prepared for this. Like Dave said, the more prepared you are, the more attractive of a buyer you are going to be to the seller.
Perfect. Great, guys. Yeah, and we're going to be putting out more education that specifically gets into how to understand a profit and loss statement and interpret tax returns, because that's a big piece of it. Again, the less you know, the less confident you'll be going through the process. And our goal is to give you education so that you can move through the deal and gain confidence as you go through each stage of the transaction. So, cool. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll follow up with an email and circulate the recording. Also, if you want to get additional information, we have a blog we started. It's on our website, rosendentaltransitions.com. And on that blog, there's a podcast. We post our recordings of the webinars, but on the podcast, we talked to Nancy Kagan of Rosen Summit. We have an interview with John Eskow, a dental specific attorney. Blake's on there, Mark Rosen, OSHA compliance, financial advisors. We go through basically all of the people you need on your team. So you can follow that. It's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as well. But again, you can go to the rosendentaltransitions.com website, and we're going to continue to post more and more free resources for you guys. So, all right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night. Oh, yeah. And we just put it in the chat. Thank you, Megan, for throwing that up. The link to the blog, which has the podcasts and everything on that. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Blake, for joining us. We'll do it again soon.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.